get Medicaid fixed, there's not going to be any money for education, agriculture, or anything else. He's right. Every tax dollar you send to Columbus, 40 cents goes directly to pay for Medicaid. Give you a comparison, 38 cents will go for education, 11 cents for prisons, and the percentage goes down from there. We must gain control of Medicaid. You know, Ohioans, like Americans, are generous people. They're supportive, and if somebody needs medical treatment, they don't have the financial means to pay for it. We understand that. But let me give you a couple of examples. Just here in Columbus, we were having meetings with the new administration, and we were coming up with those things that we might do in the Medicaid area that would make it a more economical program and maintain enrollment as well as effectiveness. So it was kind of a low-hanging fruit, because what's happening now in Columbus, it's kind of like someone flying an airplane at the same time developing some engineering for a new set of wings. It's a big job to fly as well as remodel the airplane, and that's what we're doing with Medicaid. But we identified $1.4 billion in savings. Can you imagine? We had Medicaid under the previous 2 years, the budget, spread among 7 different state agencies. So we're bringing that into one. We're doing some things that I think people, frankly, won't even notice, at least the recipients of the service. Those who are providing the service, I think they're going to know the difference. So it's going to take some time, but I think you can expect in Ohio that we're going to reform Medicaid. Now, this fall, some of you probably have signed, some of you may have passed petitions to put the mandatory federal health insurance that you must take or pay a penalty. We're putting that on the ballot here in Ohio. Now, it's somewhat symbolic. We know that it's going to be it's already in the federal courts. If the federal judge was appointed by a Democrat, they tend to think it's okay. If the federal judge is appointed by a Republican, they think there's some constitutionality problems with federally mandated insurance or pay a penalty. So it's going to end up, no doubt, in the Supreme Court. But in the meantime, we've had 27 attorney generals who have filed lawsuits representing 27 states, of course. Ohio is one of them. So even though it's somewhat symbolic, I think it's important for us this next November, as we go to the polls, to support the idea that Ohio will decide. Ohioans will decide about health insurance. So if you haven't signed one of those petitions, you may want to do that. I think they need to be turned in around the 1st of July, so there's still some time, and I know a number of people are filing those petitions. Simply to support the idea that there's nothing in the Constitution that indicates that every American must take mandated federal health insurance or pay a penalty. So that's kind of the deal with the health issue, and I continue to serve on Finance and Appropriations Committee. And this is a committee that has the responsibility for developing the 2-year budget for the state of Ohio. It's a big job. It takes a lot of time. I typically spend 3 days a week in Columbus. I go over either Monday night, depending on my first appointment, or Tuesday. I go over early Tuesday morning. Usually get into the office around 6:45 a.m. Try to be out of there by 9:30 p.m. Do the same thing on Wednesday, and almost the same thing on Thursday. Only on Thursday I come home whenever I get done. Well, working on the Finance and Appropriations Committee, we started going over 4 days a week, and then 5 days a week, and then 6 days a week until we were finished and we sent it over to the Senate. The bill that for the budget came over from the governor's office, 3,869 pages. And we made some amendments, we made some changes. But this was after we heard a lot of testimony. Can you believe that I sat through 128 hours of testimony from 198 well, there were a few who were not, but for the most part, from 198 tax spenders. And we need to keep that in mind. We're spending people's money. And of course, everybody recognized, as we started with an $8.8 billion shortfall, that there were going to be some cuts, and they were willing to accept the cuts, but they were saying, now, my program is very important, so give me a little cut and give give them bigger cuts. Well, after listening to all that testimony from all of those people, we had an opportunity to amend the governor's budget. So we had a little over 1,000 amendments. So we started listening to the testimony about those 1,000 amendments, and finally we voted on the amendments. And I wasn't pleased with the budget entirely. Just to give you an example, there's 25 YMCAs in Ohio that conduct a pre-diabetic instructional program on diet and exercise. Ys are good at that. And for $800,000, they were able to serve a large number of people. So they were willing to take $700,000 in the spirit of cuts, and I was carrying the amendment. I was able to get, we have 32 people on the Finance and Appropriations Committee. That's just one less than the entire Senate. But I was able to get 12, some Democrats as well as some Republicans, 12 members of the committee who joined me in the amendment to get the $700, and we were unsuccessful. Just gives you an idea of how difficult it was to put together a budget that's balanced and yet provides a safety net for people who need it. So it went over to the Senate, and I immediately went over to the Senate and worked with several senators, including Senator Bill Beagle, who helps represent Darke County in the Senate, and we tried again. So my third tactic is to work with Dr. Winslow, Ted Winslow, who is the Director of the Department of Health, and pointing out to him how important this was. It really fits the governor's pattern on we invest money and we save money. And so I have my fingers crossed, but I think we may get somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000 after all, simply as a line item in the Department of Health's budget. So I'm sharing this with you just so you have an idea how difficult it was to come up with that balanced budget, which we must have, of course, by June 30th of this year. We can't borrow money from the Chinese, we cannot print money, and the federal stimulus money is not going to come to Ohio this time. It was one-time money. We told people it was one-time money, and Commissioner, Darke County paid attention to that one-time money and didn't spend it on reoccurring costs. You were very cautious with your elected officials team, and I think it's going to be difficult, but I think you're one of the counties that's going to have a good chance of being able to get through this next year or two and still provide the services that Darke County has won. So you and your members of the elected official team are to be commended for doing the right thing and managing your funds. Let me go to some other areas real quickly in which you might have an interest. I shared with you my schedule. One of the things I do is I visit an employer every week. Some profit, some nonprofit, some nonprofit that'd like to be profit. But we visit and we talk about what I can do working for them. You know, I understand the way this is structured. I work for you. You know, the taxpayers do not work for me. So we talk about what we can do to change it, and frankly, it's been interesting because it has reinforced those things. It's not only a matter of the money, the red tape, the paperwork, but they are also concerned about the degree to which we have a number of state employees who come out and go into their office in an adversarial relationship, whether they're with the EPA, or worker comp, or some of the other state agencies. That's going to change. Governor Kasich has made it abundantly clear that we work for the taxpayers, and when we go out to spend time with an employer, we're there to help them, literally help them meet whatever the regulations might be. No more of this adversarial relationship, playing gotcha, trying to add to the income of the agency simply by the number of fines, the amount of fines that are levied. I also serve on the Financial Institutions, Housing, and Urban Development Committee. In fact, I received a phone call from the speaker this afternoon in the car indicating that he would like for me to serve as chairman of that committee. I've agreed to do that, and I'm looking forward to it because it has the opportunity to work with local government as well as to work with the banking industry, because there's no doubt that if we're going to have the economic recovery we need to have the capitalization necessary for small businesses to be able to expand. So I'm looking forward to having additional responsibilities in that committee. As you think about Columbus and what's going on there, everything tends to be a compromise. You know, one of the, well, I need to tell you that the previous General Assembly had 27 committees, which they increased from the previous General Assembly from 21 committees. In this General Assembly, under Leader Batchelder, Speaker Batchelder, we've cut that to 17 committees. We save anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 per committee. Now, as a result, some of the committees are hearing some legislation that they otherwise might not hear. For example, the Agricultural Committee, and the chairman's a good friend of mine, and we meet weekly so I can stay in tune with what's going on in the Agricultural Committee. We have the Ohio Veterinarians Association, who are really supporting a bill to add a bittering agent to antifreeze. Why? Well, because of a little antifreeze, through, on the garage floor, and the cat licks it, the cat may not survive. Same way with the dog. Even, I understand, there's some concern about children. So, you might say, well, heck, we ought to be doing that. Well, the thing of it is, the Ohio Manufacturers Association, representing the people who make antifreeze, they're not too excited about that. So there's this tug of back and forth between the Veterinarians Association and the Ohio Manufacturing Association. Another bill that may be introduced in the Ag Committee would require every person who has one or more cats to have that cat vaccinated for rabies. Now, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people think that's a great idea. You have a cat, pet, you ought to get it vaccinated. That ought to be a state law. I want to tell you, as a farm boy who was reared on a dairy farm, my dad and mother, we probably had at any one time 15 cats. I don't even know, we did not know where they came from. Sometimes they just appeared. I was old enough to know where little cats come from. We didn't know where all these cats came from. And I can tell you that I doubt if my dad would have been interested in paying for rabies shots for 12, 15 cats. Well, there are probably a couple of my mother's favorites. She had a lot of influence on him, and I'm sure, her favorite 2 cats would have received the rabies shot. So, what makes sense to those people who have no idea about what it's like on a farm? It's just amazing. I said today at lunch, there are 4 members of the House who have any connection with farming, any background in agriculture. We have 99 members. So 95 of them probably think that, you know, all this stuff comes from Kroger's, and they have no idea where Kroger is. So it's, I think, a challenge for those of us from agricultural areas to continue to be on our toes so that we can make sure that the biggest industry in Ohio, agriculture, has the ability to do what they do best. And that's to grow the crops and the livestock upon which all of us are dependent. Have you heard that or read that in the newspaper? My golly, you think that the Wild West is coming back. We need Annie Oakley once again to be here to protect all of us from this crazy stuff that's going to be going on. Let me give you a little more information. First of all, the bill only applies to people who have a concealed carry permit. Now maybe some of you do. A concealed carry permit in Ohio, they must have 12 hours of instruction. They are thoroughly vetted by the law enforcement individuals in each county. And once they get this permit, then they may want to carry their concealed weapon with them for protection. And if they want to go into where an eating establishment that may serve alcohol, you know, they didn't have it, they couldn't, their rights didn't include that. So this bill simply says, yes, indeed, you can do that. Now, if they touch a drop of alcohol, if they consume a drop of alcohol, it's a felony, which means jail time or fine, or fine. They lose their concealed carry permit. So these law-abiding individuals, we have some 225,000 in Ohio, would be in serious difficulty. So it's, and here's the other thing. If you own a restaurant and you serve alcohol there and you don't want any concealed carry permit holders there, you just put a sign on the front door. And they will not be able to enter with their concealed carry weapon. So it's a little bit different than what some of the newspapers have indicated. We have some other bills that are going to be coming up shortly. We've got 2 bills that, in regard to abortions. Both bills would prohibit abortions. The one bill is the, if as soon as the heartbeat can be identified, that bill would go into effect. The other bill, I think, is, I'm thinking it's 20 weeks, or maybe it's 26 weeks, but somewhere in there it would be the time. And so these are being discussed in committee, and there's a lot of testimony, and there are people who are for it, people who are against it. The governor's talking about doing some privatization. We currently have six prisons. One of them is vacant that he's thinking we ought to sell. And the other 5 are, 2 of those are currently operated by private companies. So we have 3 others that have been added that would be included in this, with the idea of exactly what should government be doing. Wouldn't that be a wonderful question to ask in Washington, D.C.? What exactly should government be doing? Well, I imagine that there's some differences of opinion, but I imagine in this room we could probably come up with a list upon which most of us could agree. Another area, the turnpike. The people who operate the turnpike are paid about 25% more than comparable jobs in the private sector. And you can imagine they're thoroughly opposed to the idea of having the turnpike leased, or heaven forbid, sold. The lottery. Now, to give you an idea, you know where the headquarters would be for the lottery? You thinking Columbus? That's where the Columbus is the capital.
Where?
No, it's in Cleveland.
Oh.
It's up in Cleveland.
Sure.
The lottery has more patronage. Well, I think the Department of Transportation may have more even than the lottery, but the lottery has a lot of patronage, and these are all government employees, and the governor's saying, hey, if we can have this operate in the private sector. We ought to be thinking about that. We ought to explore that. Unemployment compensation. Right now, we're developing 3 models, trying to improve the model we have, going with a private model, and then a hybrid model, which has some of the public and some of the private characteristics. I'll get it here, the liquor, the sale of liquor. Probably a subject not many of you know much about. But in the liquor department, it's somewhat privatized now. The governor's saying, hey, we ought to take a look at privatizing the liquor business. Where does it say the government ought to be in the business of selling liquor? Some good questions. Now, I'm not sure the governor has made up his mind. Now, I know a lot of legislators, we've not made up our mind, but we are determined to take a look at it from the standpoint that it may be good for Ohio, it may be good for Ohioans. We have a responsibility to investigate, analyze, and make an informed decision. So these are a number of things, and I've saved maybe the best to last, and that's Senate Bill 5. I have never heard such vulgarity in my life as I heard in the Ohio House of Representatives, the People's House. It was embarrassing. Now, I had heard all those words before, but never in just one sentence. It was amazing. Amazing. And they had the same experience over in the Senate. It was very, very disappointing. Granted, we can disagree, but can't we disagree agreeably? We have to act like that. So it was a nasty, nasty experience. Basically, Senate Bill 5 is receiving, Ohioans are receiving a lot of misinformation, lack of factual information about Senate Bill 5. It does take some rights in collective bargaining away, but they still can collectively bargain over wages and conditions of employment. I'll tell you what's happened. Probably not many of you remember, well, in 1983, Senate Bill 133 was passed by one vote in the Senate. One vote. Steve Maurer cast the deciding vote. It cost him his job as a senator. But that's when collective bargaining started. They used the private sector model, which tends to work rather well, in the public sector, where it doesn't work very well. Going back to Franklin Roosevelt saying, hey, collective bargaining in the private sector does not work in the public sector. And that's another speech. I'll be glad to come back sometime and talk about why that's so. But here's the thing. The referendum is going to have sufficient signatures, and it's going to be in the ballot in November. It is, along with the constitutional amendments regarding Obamacare. They'll both be on there. For an off-year election, this is going to be an exciting one. A lot of money is going to be spent. The last gubernatorial race, over $32 million spent. But that's not the most money we've ever spent at an election. The lawyers for the 4 casinos, they spent $52 million. They're thinking these 2 issues in November may exceed that even. So it's going to be fun down at the Board of Elections.